Hello, and welcome to the National Youth Leaders Debate at Humber College. I'm your host, Catherine Green. We've heard a lot during this federal election campaign about tax breaks, benefits, and foreign policy. But what does that mean for us? We'll start by introducing our three participants for this afternoon's debate. Alexander Cohen, Director of Communications for the Ontario Young Liberals. Natalie Petra, Director of Communications for the Young New Democrats. And Matthew Castleman, President of the Green Party of Ontario. We reached out to the Conservative Party of Canada at the federal and provincial level, but they were unwilling to provide us with a participant. Thank you all for being here today. Let us get the debate underway. The participants have drawn for order. I will begin with one question directed to the first participant. The participant will be allowed 2 minutes to respond, followed by 6 minutes of open debate.
Oh God,
Let's begin. The first question goes to Natalie Petra of the New Democratic Party, by order of draw. Youth unemployment has hovered around 13% since 2008, and this number does not take underemployment into account. Please explain how your party will deal with this sad reality.
So that's a really important question. Honestly, I think it's probably the most important one for youth in this election. Something that's really important for the NDP is pointing at the fact that under the Conservatives, we've lost about 40,000 jobs in the last year. That's huge. For those of us who are looking to graduate in the next little while, that's not acceptable to lose 40,000 jobs. So for the NDP, there's three planks, I guess you could say, to our youth unemployment strategy. The first is to tackle unpaid internships. I know that a lot of people, if I'm a student too, and maybe some of you guys have experienced that as well, but a lot of students have experienced graduating and then being told, okay, well, you need to get work experience, and how are you going to do that? Well, it's going to be an unpaid internship, and that's not really acceptable, especially for those of us who aren't really rich when we get into school in the first place, so it's hard to kind of get ahead in that way. The NDP will put in place regulations to combat unpaid internships, and we also want to put in place laws to make sure that if you experience issues at work and you're an intern, you have recourse. Right now, if you experience sexual harassment or a workplace injury or you want to take vacation, you have no rights just because you're not actually included in the Employment Act. Secondly, we want to create youth jobs. We're going to be creating 40,000 youth spaces that are all paid either through co-ops, internships, federal spaces, and then finally, as you guys know, we're advocating for $15 a day minimum wage for federally regulated industries. That will help at least 100,000 jobs, if not more. But also, for those of you who are looking to get into federally regulated industries, especially with the 40,000 jobs that we'll be creating, it will help because those will be federally regulated jobs and you will be earning that $15 a day minimum wage. Thanks.
Thank you. Time is up. We'll now move to the floor. Would anybody like to start us off?
Lord Almighty.
Sure. I can respond, I think, to something that Natalie had said, actually. So I think it's important to note that the $15 minimum wage that's being proposed by the NDP is a very good starting point, but only includes jobs that are controlled by the federal government. That's a very small percentage of the total jobs that are found in Canada. So the vast majority of you are going to be filling positions that are actually going to be covered by provincial regulations. So that's a promise that won't be affected by you. One thing that you might find more relevant is the Green Party's commitment to a guaranteed livable income, which basically means that our plan is to remove the duplicity and replication that the host of social programs that Canada has today and replace it by a guaranteed livable income that will be indexed and matched to the minimum standard of living that would keep you above the poverty line. And that would be taxed back depending on the amount of income that you received to ensure that all Canadians have the ability to live at a level that is deemed to be of a minimum standard. And I think that's a commitment that we make to Canadians that is significantly more honest and one that is going to provide us with the opportunity to not only eliminate homelessness in the future in Canada, but also eliminate poverty.
So can I respond to that again? Sorry, Alex.
Go ahead. I'll get in there
Because
eventually.
there were a few things that you said in there that were really misleading and that I wanted to respond to. Firstly, I did say that the 40,000 new jobs that we'll be creating are intended to be within federally regulated industries. So the jobs that are specifically targeting youth, be they co-ops, internships, or just straight up workplace placements, those are in federally regulated industries, and you will be affected by the $15 a day minimum wage. Secondly, to say that the Green Party has great ambition is true. I do like your plan, but it's not honest in that right now minimum wage is provincially regulated in many industries, and the federal government constitutionally just doesn't have the power to go in there and impose that kind of wage without having some sort of massive fight with the provinces. So much as I think that it's a good starting point to institute that type of federal minimum wage that we're proposing, we're hoping that it does pressure provinces to come back and say, okay, we want our workers to be living at the same wages as those who are working in federally regulated industries. And that's really dishonest on the part of the Green Party to say that, we're going to institute a baseline minimum wage for everybody when it's simply not within their jurisdiction to do so at this point in time.
Okay. I want to get in on this. The fact is that we have a youth unemployment crisis in this country, and while I think 40,000 jobs is a nice idea, how about 120,000 jobs for young people? How about 40,000 jobs a year for 3 years? That's what Justin Trudeau's plan is. That's what the Liberal Party is proposing. We want to invest $1.3 billion over 3 years in jobs for young people, jobs like at Parks Canada, the Canada Summer Job Grant, and a variety of other programs offered by the federal government, because the fact is that not only are young people missing out on having jobs, they're missing out on a building block of their career. When you can't get that first job, when you can't come out of school, get a good employment opportunity, and then build off of that, your career is stunted, your growth is stunted, and your earnings potential long into the future is significantly reduced. What the Liberal Party wants to do is give every young Canadian the chance to graduate, do something meaningful, and we're putting our money where our mouth is by creating 120,000 jobs within our first mandate, and that's really the shock doctrine, the medicine that's needed for the youth jobs crisis in this country. We also want to invest $40 million to create more co-ops and placements, because we know just how valuable those are to people starting their careers, as well as improve the youth service program to send young people all over the country, enabling them to do really good work, as well as have a good experience, invest in other communities, and see this great country.
Just to also I think clarify, because a guaranteed livable income isn't a minimum wage. So what the guaranteed livable income, just to make sure that there's no confusion from any of the other participants, social assistance, disability supports, old age supplement, national child care benefit are all things that are under federal jurisdiction and all provide a duplication or replication of all these services that Canadians need, but provide significantly more bureaucracy and red tape and perverse incentives that actually disincentivize Canadians to do things that the programs were intended to do. The guaranteed livable income would essentially be one benefit that would replace the host of benefits. This is basically a build-off of the Liberal plan to consolidate the child care tax benefit and the national child benefit. So that's a small version of basically what the Green Party is proposing. In addition, I think we're the only party that is taking a huge amount of opportunity by investing in the Canadian Sustainable Generations Fund, which will help Canadians compete with the tremendously heavily capitalized tech startup in the United States. Many of the programs here at Humber are innovative programs that need to compete against the United States, and that's a program that's going to directly benefit you here at Humber.
So I'd like to just quickly unpack the tremendous amount of BS we just heard, because it was a lot. Let's just firstly clarify a few things. So at first, the Green Party came at my position by stating that we don't have some sort of federal minimum wage. And then he just admitted himself that he doesn't have a plan for that either. So he wants to have some sort of guaranteed income by consolidating social benefits. Firstly, let me just say, I'm the New Democratic Party representative.
Our time is up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let me just remind that we are here to encourage debate, but let's keep it civil. Let's keep the language civil. We're going to move on to the next question right now. Tuition fees have been steadily increasing for several years. The average student will graduate with a debt of $27,000. The Canadian Federation of Students would like to see more funding go to grants rather than student loans. Alexander Cohen, what is the Liberal Party prepared to do to address the lack of affordable higher education?
I think you're going to like our plan. The fact is that much as with jobs, it is simply too hard for young people in this country to afford to pay for school, and we've seen a government and a prime minister really that has sort of watched the issue whistle by as higher education becomes more and more unaffordable for really way too many Canadians. And so to that end, while it is mostly a provincial issue, the Liberal Party believes that we need strong federal leadership on this issue, and we're ready to deliver that within the first year of our mandate. So specifically, our plan is to increase the maximum Canada student grant by 50%, so that would increase it to $3,000. And for the average student, that would mean about $1,000 to $1,500 more in your pocket, grants, allowing you to go to school, allowing you to have more money to spend on other things, more money to invest in later on building your career or whatever. We'll also raise the thresholds for the Canada Student Grant so that more middle-class families qualify, because the fact is that it is really the middle class and the children of the middle class, many of whom I imagine are in this auditorium today, that have been having a harder and harder time affording higher education. And we want to build that opportunity, build the economy as in our whole plan from the middle out. And this really starts with allowing more middle-class families to get grants. Lastly, we'll rejig the student loan program to ensure that no one needs to repay their student loans until they're making over $25,000 a year. The fact is the government shouldn't be taking interest and shouldn't be taking money off kids who have gotten an education, spent the money, but haven't yet gotten the job yet. The fact is that an education is only good if you're able to get a job after, and that ties back to a lot of what we want to do by creating 120,000 youth jobs, 3 times more than any of the other parties up here. And so by doing that, we think we'll make education more accessible both to the middle class and those striving to join it, and we'll make education something that once again is a right for everybody and is something that all Canadians have access to and are able to use it. We'll build the economy and have a more educated country.
Okay, and again, we're going to open it up, so if anybody would like to jump in, feel free.
Sure, I can jump in quickly, and I'll be a little more mindful of my time this time. So the NDP's plan is a little bit different than the Liberal plan that's being proposed. Firstly, we want to increase federal transfers to provinces. Right now, education is a provincially regulated thing, I guess, and we want to make sure that the federal government is doing its share in making sure that tuition is kept lower for students. The end goal for the NDP is to eventually end tuition costs in Canada. But we recognize that that's not an on and off switch. You can't do that immediately. You can't come to any institution, whether it's Humber College or my school, the University of Toronto, and just say, oh, we're going to cut out your funding immediately. They're not going to take that well. So you need to work on gradually reducing things. In the meantime, to help provide relief for students, we want to freeze interest on your debts immediately. So there will be no more interest if you vote for the NDP on your student loan debts. We also think that the student experience is all-encompassing, so we have to make investments in public transit, housing, and infrastructure, and that's something that the NDP is committed to, as well as creating those internship spaces once you've actually graduated. Finally, I think that something that's really interesting to note was when you were speaking about the original question, you mentioned the Canadian Federation of Students. And the Canadian Federation of Students is actually, their former chairperson, Jessica McCormick, she was their chairperson last year, pardon me. She's actually called the NDP plan a step forward. And I think that's really important to note, that if you are looking to your students' union and you're trying to say, okay, which program is my students' union saying is realistic, achievable, and going to help students immediately and in the long run. And that plan is the NDP plan.
The Green Party also had the good fortune of being fully endorsed by the feds when we launched our education platform in Guelph a couple weeks ago. Some of the points that might be most interesting to you would be an abolition of tuition fees for university and skilled trades programs and a slashing of the student debt. And this isn't just a novel idea, this is something that has been tested and true in a variety of different countries, Germany, Finland, Sweden, Austria, Norway being just a few. We also would like to eliminate existing student debt loans above $10,000, with that being fully implemented by 2020, and abolish charging interest on new student loans. An additional thing that is worth noting is our party platform under education also includes looking at some of the horrific caps that are being placed, a 2% increase per year on First Nations funding that has led to a significantly large gap between the amount of money per student that's received by First Nations students and every other student in Canada. We'll make sure that that cap is eliminated so that all First Nations students in Canada have the opportunity to receive the same quality of education that every other student has the opportunity to experience. And those things are fully costed in our platform as well. The Community Environment Services Corps, as well as the plank that I just described, are going to be paid for by a 4% increase in the corporate tax rate back to what it was before the Stephen Harper government, from 15% now to 19% after a Green Party government is elected on October 19th.
I'd like to add something there. What they're not telling you is that both of their parties have all these nice pledges about, reducing tuition this way, reducing it that way, increasing transfers, all these goodies. But the fact is, both of their leaders are promising balanced budgets in the first year, and they're going to have to cut something. The fact is, the parliamentary budget officer called the NDP plan full of holes like Swiss cheese. This is a nonpartisan guy, this is not some hack. And the fact is that it is nice to dangle in front of students this, that, but when you have a budget that needs to be balanced, they're going to end up cutting something. And really, we haven't heard, especially out of the NDP, what honestly they're going to cut. The fact is, the Liberal plan, Justin Trudeau has been honest with Canadians. He's been very open. He said, we're going to run a modest deficit for 3 years. And when I speak about the Liberal promises, I know that we know fully how we're going to pay for them because we've been upfront. And so it really concerns me that they talk a very good line on helping out students, but they're going to have to cut something. And likely, it'll be something that benefits young people because they tend to be the groups that are hardest hit when governments make cuts, as an NDP government inevitably will.
So I just wanted to quickly respond because I was kind of called out there. So the Liberal plan is funded on your backs. And I say that quite literally. It will be funded on your future. They're gambling with your future. If we face an economic downturn and they're not able to rebalance that budget, you guys, us, we're the ones who are going to have to bear that cost. The NDP is proposing to raise the taxes on corporations. They're not paying their fair share right now, and they're a little bit under where they should be, especially after 10 years of Stephen Harper. Now, the other thing that I think was interesting that you mentioned is that you don't. I'm trying to find the right way to put this. You can't just simply promise students that, okay, we're going to go into debt and we're going to fix your problems, and that we're not going to cut anything. Simply put, if you want to climb out of the hole that you're going to create, you will have to cut something too. Whereas we are promising to be fiscally responsible from the beginning. And actually, if you look at provincial governments across Canada, on average, the NDP has been the best financial manager. Of course, there have been a few exceptions, generally during times of economic downturn, as was the case here in Ontario. But generally speaking, the trends show that we've actually been the best managers of the economy, and that's because we simply don't place all of our debts onto the future generation. We try to pay those costs up front.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. Thank you for finishing your point. We're going to move on to the next question. Many young Canadians are not sure if they will ever be able to afford to own a house in their lifetime. Accessing affordable housing is an uphill battle, with steep housing prices and unpredictable employment. Matthew Castleman, how can the Green Party help a generation still living under their parents' roof become independent homeowners?
Well, it's exactly right. So the average time that it'll take you to make a down payment compared to 20 years ago is double what it was. And that's a horrible thing. Well, imagine in the city of Toronto, it's even worse than that. And also, too, it's important to note that we're the only OECD country that lacks a national housing strategy. The Green Party of Canada is the only federal party that is advocating for a national housing strategy based on the Housing First principle that has been supported by economists and advocates all across our country and all over the world, that says that when you provide and when you respect the fact that housing is a human right that is recognized internationally, and you provide housing to people who need it, they will have the ability to they will be able to be more socially mobile upward when they have the supports and housing security needed to actually be able to realize some of the goals that they have for themselves. And in addition to that, we think that will be a big step towards the elimination of homelessness and poverty here in Canada. And I think it's a really great thing that the Green Party is the only party that has the guts to tackle a platform plank such as that.
Okay. Again, we're going to open it up to the floor, and if anybody would like to begin.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to take issue with is you said that the Green Party is the only party with a plan for a national housing strategy. That's not true. And I think if you look at the Liberal plan, it is really a historic investment in Canada's housing, and it's led by a guy who really knows what he's talking about when it comes to housing, and that's Adam Vaughan. And you guys might be familiar with him. He took it to Rob Ford pretty much every day of his mayoralty. But when he wasn't doing that, when he was a city councillor, he was developing serious housing plans for the city of Toronto, like in Alexandra Park, which is on Dundas West in downtown Toronto, revitalizing TCHC buildings. And now as a Liberal MP, he is part of our plan for a national housing strategy, part of our plan for $20 billion investment in social infrastructure over 10 years to be paid for with a modest deficit. We're honest about it. But really the crux of this plan is creating a whole host of affordable housing in this country, making it good for provinces and cities to invest in affordable housing, refurbishing the affordable housing we already have because it's in pretty horrendous condition. But even more so, we want to eliminate the GST on the construction of new affordable housing, giving about $125 million in tax incentives for private developers who are developing everywhere. They're building buildings everywhere. What we really need to do, though, is give them an incentive to build affordable housing so we get an economic mix, because really the housing first strategy, which is a program put in place by various municipalities and provinces over the past little bit, which the Liberal government is fully committed to supporting, really is the crux of the idea that if you have a place to live close to where you work, your economic opportunity and your chance to join the middle class, which is really at the heart of the Liberal plan, is that much greater. So we have a serious investment, we have a serious guy leading it, and we want every Canadian to be able to afford a home. And for young people especially, it really bites us because you all know, living in the city of Toronto, it's just too hard. It's unacceptably hard to find an affordable place to live, and eventually we're going to have a generation of young people who are priced out of the market, and the Liberal government won't allow that to happen.
So so the fact that you just said that we have no plan is really silly. I think all three of us have a plan. You might not agree with it, but please don't be misleading in that way. I want to start out with one quick fact. There, on any given night in Canada, there are 35,000 people who are sleeping on the streets. And I'm just going to pause for a second to let that sink in, because that's absolutely disgusting and unacceptable. The NDP wants to introduce an Affordable Housing Act where we would dedicate a stable amount of funding, $2 billion per year, and construction incentives to help businesses who want to create affordable housing make that financially viable for themselves. And the thing that's really interesting about what neither of my colleagues here have mentioned is that a lot of the time, affordable housing is left to municipalities. The province mandates a certain amount of housing that is supposed to be built in every city or town, depending on your income median and a whole bunch of other factors. And a lot of the time, especially here in Ontario, municipalities are just not meeting that average. And that's because they only get 8 cents out of every tax dollar. I know that because I ran for city council myself. I've done this. Lastly, I just wanted to point out that your party just touts Adam Vaughan, but I hope that you guys realize he's running against Olivia Chow. And Olivia Chow is
a soundbite politician
fantastic.
If I've ever seen one.
Firstly, she's a fantastic human being. Secondly, she's extremely well loved. And thirdly, she has so much experience, especially with affordable housing. She's been living in Toronto. She's occupied affordable housing units herself. She knows what that struggle is like firsthand. So to claim that Adam Vaughan is going to win, first off, or that if he does, that he will be able to implement your housing strategy is also a little misleading.
Both parties have actually had an opportunity to pass legislation that would work for Canadians for affordable housing. Bill C-400, which was attempted to be passed in the legislature, was not an action bill. It was a I support social housing projects bill. The two plans that are being proposed by the traditional parties just fall into the same trap of not allowing or not having enough spaces for people who have the highest critical need, people who are chronic substance abuse users, First Nations communities, many communities that fall to the wayside when there's only a cap of 100,000 affordable housing units available on the market. Oftentimes what the evidence shows, what policy suggests, is that those Canadians who need housing the most are often the ones that are served the least by the policy proposals that are being implemented by the mainstream parties, which is why a national housing strategy that incorporates needs for all Canadians, especially those that need it the most, especially First Nations communities where 1 in 5 people don't have adequate housing. Those are the people who need it the most, and those are the only people that are being served by policies within the Green Party.
Being selective with the facts again there.
Yeah, I mean, we've never been in government, first off, but continue.
There's also a multi-million-dollar plan to improve housing, both for First Nations living off reserve, which is a totally underappreciated problem, but also living on reserve, so you conveniently ignored that. But I want to go back a little bit earlier and just defend the honor of my boy Adam Vaughan here. The fact is that the race that's been on at Fort York is a race between heavyweights, and Olivia Chow does have a nice story, and she is a very persuasive politician, but there's only one person in that race that's actually implemented affordable housing and built affordable housing units in the city of Toronto, and that's Adam Vaughan. There's also only one politician who didn't leave his or her constituents to run for mayor and then lose, but that's a different story entirely. The fact is that Adam Vaughan is the real deal, and he's been recognized by nonpartisan groups as one of Canada's foremost housing experts. He's built it, he has the experience building it, and he is the kind of person that I would want not just as a Liberal minister of affordable housing, but as Canada's Minister of Affordable Housing.
So just to kind of respond to that, Olivia did resign her seat, that is true, but she...
Sorry to interrupt. Okay. Our time is up, but please continue, finish.
I was just going to say that she ran to try to serve more people. And unfortunately, she did lose to John Tory. That happens sometimes. We've all experienced wins and losses. But she is coming back because she still cares about her community, right? So to say that like, oh, she resigned her seat and now she's coming back, that's really misleading as well. And it just shows that she has a lot of heart to keep going after such a loss.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here. Canada's environmental record will affect young people more than any other voting demographic. Natalie Petra, how does the new Democratic Party plan to reduce environmental damage in its first year, if elected, and not in 10 or 20 when it will be too late?
Yeah, so there's a couple of key points for us, but, well, the big thing for me, and this is a bit of a personal point because I focused some of my own research on this at school. Right now in environmental legislation, you have 4 levels. So you have your international, your federal, your provincial, and your municipal. And some responsibilities are delegated to each one of those levels. So you have a lot of problems right now where there's a lot of bureaucratic overlap and there's holes in places where nobody's covering that slack. So what the NDP believes is that we have to have some sort of strong, stable plan that is federally regulated. We need to take control of our future and of our environment. I also think that something that's really key is that under the Conservative government, we've pulled out of the Kyoto Protocol, and under the Liberal government, we've seen emissions rise 34%. Neither of those parties is going to actually commit to the environment. We will reintroduce Jack Layton's Climate Change Act. Tom Mulcair has a proven record. He's been an environment minister in cabinet in Quebec, and we will close some of those legislative gaps. Finally, the thing that we must understand is that we can't have a conversation about the environment without having a conversation about First Nations. So to us, it's really key that in any environmental decision that we're making, that we consult with First Nations on a nation-to-nation basis. They need to be respected. They need to be treated respectfully as their own sovereign group, because that is what they're constitutionally guaranteed. It's just the right thing to do. So yeah, but I invite my colleagues to speak further on this if they'd like.
I'd love to. I think four points that I think differentiate the Green Party environmental platform from the other major parties. First being our unequivocal opposition to new pipeline projects that are meant to export raw bitumen outside of Canada. What we support here in Canada are oil refineries that have value-added natural resource products that are going to actually create jobs for Canadians. one thing that I think is important to note for you here in Canada is that the Northern Gateway Pipeline, Keystone XL, Energy East, Kinder Morgan, all creating very few jobs for Canadians, 200 jobs for Energy East and 50 jobs for Kinder Morgan, doubling the tanker traffic on the East Coast and increasing tanker traffic by 7 times on the West Coast for those 2 projects alone. We're the only party that's not going to support those projects because those projects necessarily mean an increase in the production on the oil sands that is inconsistent with any plans by the other parties to decrease emissions here in Canada. We also are going to demonstrate climate leadership that is going to be a lot different than the one you've seen from Stephen Harper and a lot different from the ones that Rachel Notley is proposing to go to sell Alberta oil sands at Paris. That's not going to happen with Green Party representatives. We're also going to say, we're also very proud of our policy on carbon taxation. The only policy in Canada so far that has been effective at reducing greenhouse gas emissions is BC's carbon tax policy. We don't think that we should wait for the provinces to take action like the Liberals suggest, and we don't think creating an artificial market of credits for emissions is a very effective approach like the NDP suggests under cap and trade. That's not going to create serious action. That's going to be an unnecessary burden on the economy for environmental protection that is not going to be happening under our revenue neutral plan, and we're so proud to support those projects. Thank you.
So, so just to quickly rebut that, though, I'm surprised, to be honest, that the Green Party is anti-cap and trade, but I'm going to not bother touching that point because I think there's 2 other points that are really important to be made. Firstly, as Linda McQuaig has said, the oil will stay in the ground under a new democratic plan if it does not pass extremely stringent environmental tests. These tests have been gutted by the Stephen Harper government, and we will bring back strong environmental regulations. And it also will stay in the ground if it doesn't pass muster from First Nations groups. So I think with those 2 things, we have a really strong plan to make sure that there will not be any new pipeline projects built unless there is some sort of serious environmental case to do so. And at this point, I really don't think there is personally. So that's kind of irrelevant from your point of view. Secondly, I do want to note that the Liberal, their campaign chair has actually noted that has told the people who are building the Energy East pipeline how to specifically lobby them if they win government. That's not really the way that you protect the environment, and I'd really like to see what you have to say to that.
To that specifically, it was a decision made by a member of our campaign staff. Leader Justin Trudeau has been very clear. He has resigned. We hold our campaign to the highest standards. But moreover, that's, as usual for the NDP, a distraction from the real issues. The fact is the Liberals have the most realistic plan and the most immediate plan to deal with climate change. And you asked her about what an NDP government would do within a year, and she was pretty vague on it. What I can tell you is there's a climate change conference happening in Paris in December. We're going to be there. Justin Trudeau, if he's lucky enough to be Prime Minister, will be there. And within 90 days of that conference, we will sit down with the provinces and establish a Medicare-style approach for climate regulations across Canada. And the important thing about this is it was characterized by the Green Party as waiting for the provinces. The fact is the provinces are way ahead of the federal government. Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, and BC, the 4 biggest provinces, the 4 provinces that actually make the difference in Canada's emissions, all have climate taxes, carbon taxes, cap and trade, stuff like that. The fact is we got to work with them. We have to build on the progress that's already being made, and we're going to do that. Secondly, we're going to end subsidies to fossil fuel companies right away, because the fact is if you're pulling oil out of the ground, not only are you making a whack of money to do it, you're also polluting the environment. There's no reason why you should get the taxpayers' money to assist you with doing it. And lastly, we're going to invest heavily in green technology. And this is really important for young people, because these are jobs that are being created in Canada. They're unique, and they're not the kind of jobs that are just going to go away, because these are industries that Canada will become a leader in, that not only will help the economy, will help the environment, as something that goes hand in hand, which neither other party wants to recognize. Lastly, when it comes to pipelines, Liberals have the most realistic plan on pipelines. We say no to Northern Gateway because it's absolutely unacceptable for the environment in BC. But when it comes to Energy East, the fact is that a lot of people in Eastern Canada burn oil. I bet every person in this room burned oil in some way today. And that oil right now is coming from Saudi Arabia. So there's no reason why we should be buying oil from a murderous regime to burn in Eastern Canada when we have oil in Western Canada, and we have a pipeline that's ready to go. It just needs to be retrofitted. The Energy East project makes sense, and a Liberal government is committed to ensuring the highest standards, obviously, when it comes to First Nations, environmental groups, et cetera, but doing what makes sense for the environment, doing what makes sense for the economy, because you really can't separate the two. And if we're going to have prosperity, if we're going to have climate sustainability, we need to have both.
The Energy East pipeline actually is exporting and transporting raw bitumen, so not material that can be used for East Coast energy needs. The purpose of the pipelines to each of the coasts is to transport our natural resources out to foreign markets. We're going to increase production here in Canada of the oil sands to increase the amount of money that is being given to oil giants. Energy East, Kinder Morgan, all of those projects do just that. So it's very disingenuous for the main parties to advocate for real targets on greenhouse gas emission reductions and still support either an ambiguous target or ambiguous line in which they'll support, or just a flat-out support. The thing about cap and trade versus...
Sorry. I'm just going to say time is up. If you would like to conclude your argument.
Yeah, I think it's one more important point to make. The leadership that's being provided by the provinces under cap and trade in Ontario and Quebec, the reason why that that plan is flawed is the exemptions that are given to main industries like oil refineries and aluminum plants in Quebec and the automotive sector in Ontario, and the decrease in the actual cost of emissions credits in the California plan that they're joining. It's a flawed program. It's not leadership, and that's exactly why we shouldn't be allowing the provinces to go down that path.
Okay. If you are just joining us now, we are talking to the youth leaders of the Liberal, Green, and New Democratic parties. The Conservative Party has chosen not to participate in today's debate, and now we'll move on to the second round. The niqab has become a big election issue in this campaign. A poll taken earlier this year shows more than 80% of Canadians are uncomfortable with women wearing the niqab during citizenship ceremonies. Is this an important issue, or is it distracting from the larger issue of our rights and our freedoms? Alexander Cohen of the Liberal Party, you have 2 minutes.
I think it's not only sad, but it's also very disgusting, the point at which the niqab has become an issue in this election. The fact is, there are real serious issues going on in this country. For young people, it is too hard to get a job, pay for school, find a place to live. Meanwhile, we're talking about what 2 women over the past 10 years were wearing at their citizenship ceremony. It's ludicrous. The fact is that we have a positive, comprehensive plan, a very detailed plan to enact all sorts of changes in this country, and we really think it's a desperate move. It's a racist move. It is a Hail Mary pass for the Conservatives to be stoking the kind of resentment, the kind of anger they are with the issue of the niqab. We think it is classic wedge politics. It is classic dog whistle racism, and really, I think Canadians are better than that. And I think that our politics aren't about these kind of these tiny identity issues that pit one group against each other. The fact is, I don't think a single person in this room has their life, not just today, but any day, affected by whether a woman is wearing her niqab to a citizenship ceremony. And even more so, you can clearly tell it is an ideological battle by the government because they have been denied by not 1, but 2 courts. The fact is, this is an issue they're using to distract from their woeful economic performance, their lack of a plan, their really inept campaign that they've been running, where people have been popping off and whatever. And the fact is that a Liberal government is focused on the real issues, and the Liberal plan is focused on the issues that matter to the middle class. When our first bill, if we are lucky enough to be elected government, will be to cut taxes for 90% of Canadians and pay for it by raising taxes on the wealthiest 1%, something no other party is committed to doing. So the fact is, we would rather talk about the issues that matter to people. We would rather talk about how you guys can get jobs, how we're going to make it easier to pay for school, how we're going to make it easier for you guys to live your lives, rather than talk about an issue that is not only just designed to pit people against each other, but is totally irrelevant to the debate and totally irrelevant to the election.
Thank you. And if we open it up to the floor.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. It's completely racist rhetoric at the end of the day. And it's interesting because it's completely rooted in the language of assimilation. Assimilation is such a difficult topic. It's like saying, okay, we need to strip you of who you are, and we need to make you like the rest of us. And what is the rest of us? What is the historical, stereotypical Canadian? Well, it's white people, frankly. It's English and French people. So when we tell people who come to Canada that we're going to assimilate you and that we're not going to allow you to use your niqab when you commit to being a citizen, you're really just being racist, flat out. There isn't an excuse for it. It's complete fear-mongering by the Conservative Party, and I'm really disgusted too to see that they're shrouding it in this language of saying, women, we're protecting women who are being oppressed by this garment. The reality is that 99% of people who wear the niqab do so by choice. And to fearmonger on those issues, instead of focusing on important issues which we really should be concerned about, like C-51 or C-24 or the Unfair Elections Act or jobs, as Alexander has said, it's really disingenuous, and it's really one of the saddest things that I've seen in politics thus far.
Yeah, I won't begin to try to understand the mindset that women who choose to wear the niqab have when they decide to wear that garment. But I do know that the Conservative record on women's rights is something that all women and all men in Canada should consider at the ballot box. The Harper Conservatives are the ones who are stalling on having a full launch of a full inquiry into missing and murdered Aboriginal women in Canada. They're the party that had facilitated the Prince Edward Island, their lack of support for women seeking abortions on that island. Only recently was there actually that service provided on the island, and it was because of Stephen Harper's government that delayed that process from happening much sooner. That party also has the fewest number of female candidates running, which I think is very telling and is very consistent with policies that are very anti-woman. I think those types of things are more indicative of the Conservative value for women and female voters than this issue alone. They also tried to do the same thing with turbans and people who decide to wear the turban and people employed by the RCMP. 10 years after that debate, I don't think our social fabric and our civilization has crumbled because we've decided to allow those men to wear that garment.
And I think too, you mentioned parties who care about women's rights. And I really want to just quickly point out that the NDP has the most women running in this election. We have over 40% of our candidates who are women, and we're really proud of that. But to be honest, it's not enough. It's not enough. I recently went to Ottawa as part of a Women in Parliament program where I got to see what it's like to be a woman on the Hill every single day. And if there's one thing that stuck with me, it was the fact that my host had left with me. If you sat every single woman who has ever been in Canadian Parliament across all time, just period, every single woman who's ever been an MP, and you put them into the House of Commons, there'd still be over 50 empty seats. There are 308 seats in Parliament right now, and there would still be over 50 empty seats if you added up every single female MP across all of Canadian history, and that's shameful. That is absolutely shameful.
I'd like to add, not only is the Liberal Party committed to having women run, we're committed to having women govern. And that's why Justin Trudeau is committed in a future Liberal cabinet, again, if we're lucky enough to form government, a lot of fingers crossed today, that a Liberal cabinet will have gender parity. Because the fact is that the cabinet has to reflect the nation. Government has to reflect what's going on in the country and and right now, we have a cabinet, especially under the Harper Conservatives. If you look at their top ministers, Moore, Kenney, Baird, et cetera, McKay, they're all, old white men. And we want to have a cabinet that looks like Canada. We're also committed to government appointments that look like Canada by increasing merit-based and diversity in the public service and boards, et cetera. They're controlled by the federal government. But mostly, the idea of a gender parity cabinet worked very well in Quebec under Jean Charest. You saw a lot more women's engagement in politics and really the needs and issues of women voters coming much more to the forefront. So we think we need that presence there. We want to ensure that, and we're committed to that. That's a promise set in stone that we will have a gender parity in cabinet, something no other party is committed to. And even more so, I guess my question to the NDP would be, I know the party policy on the niqab is one thing, but we're hearing from multiple Quebec candidates, both in the Montreal region and in several of the regions of Quebec, at all candidates' debates in unguarded moments, that they're not so comfortable with the party's position on the niqab, and they sort of feel differently. So I'm just wondering how you'd square your MP's views with that of your leader.
So I just want to point out a couple of things there. So the thing is, at the end of the day, you're never going to agree with every single thing that your party puts out there. You're just not. And if either of these two gentlemen try to say that, not on basic human rights, no, that's not what I'm getting at. Please let me finish, okay? If you ask either of these gentlemen if they agreed with every single thing that's come out of their party, they'd say no, probably. And if not, they're probably lying to you. That said, I'm really sick and tired of this rhetoric from Justin Trudeau, where he says that we're saying one thing in Quebec and another thing in the rest of Canada. And if you look at it, we've been clear and consistent every single time. The NECAB will stay if we form government, period, flat out. And there's no buts, ands, ifs about that. Maybe a few people in our caucus might be a little more uncomfortable with it, but that's frankly up to them. They're still going to vote in favor of a NECAB. You don't have to be comfortable or to personally want to participate in every single practice that you vote in favor of. You just have to come from a place of understanding and saying, this isn't for me, but it works.
To bring more Syrian refugees to Canada. What happens after they arrive here? When they step off the plane, how do they put a roof over their head and food on their table, and how are we going to pay for it? Matthew Castleman of the Green Party, you have 2 minutes.
The Green Party of Canada, as well as all other progressive parties in this election, have committed to X number of refugees coming from Syria. The Green Party has also committed to redefining what it means to be an environmental refugee, and also providing more clear standards through which people can apply for refugee status, not discriminating against people who arrive here by boat, and providing humane services with dignity to those who are fleeing crises, particularly when Canada plays a role in the proliferation of those conflicts. Canada understands the Geneva Convention and understands our duty internationally to take care of refugees, and we know that that comes at a cost to Canadians. And we're being honest with Canadians when we say we're going to have to allocate budget dollars to help serve those people and treat them with the same respect that Vietnamese refugees were provided when they came here on boats many years ago. The woman who is actually supposed to be here today, Lynn, representing the Green Party, her parents came here as Vietnamese boat people, and the opportunities that she was afforded were because of the generosity of Canadians. So we know that that's going to take resources. It's going to put a strain on our healthcare system. We're going to provide them with the services that were provided to them prior to the Conservative government, access to our healthcare services, access to dental, and to ensure that they have the ability to be treated kindly and to be treated the same way that they're being treated in progressive countries such as Germany and Europe.
Thank you, and I think everybody would like to hear from the other parties regarding this issue.
Do you want to start, or?
Yeah, I'll go at it.
Yeah.
So taking in refugees is not just a nice thing to do to help out other people in the world. It is really something that is a moral responsibility that Canada has as a first world country, as one of the most developed, and I might add, one of the most tolerant, if not the most tolerant societies on earth. And it's really been a great Canadian tradition that we have been so welcoming to refugees over the years. And as a Liberal, I'm really proud of my party's record on this, from Louis Saint Laurent in the 1950s taking over double the amount of Hungarians as we're taking Syrians now in a country half as big, to Jean Chrétien in the 1990s taking refugees from Kosovo, Croatia, and elsewhere in the Balkans. We have a very proud tradition of offering a place to the world's most vulnerable. And what we're doing now under the Harper government is we're slamming that door, and we're presenting a very cold, very mean, very petty face of Canada. And I'm really concerned about what that says about our country. And I think Canadians as a whole are better than that. And a liberal government is committed to immediately resettling 25,000 Syrian refugees in Canada. And what would that would mean, usually the way it is when we resettle refugees, cities, provinces commit to taking a certain number. They commit to supporting their housing and their food, etc. Federal government also kicks in. It's usually a partnership. It worked that way with the Vietnamese in the 1980s, as well as with the other two cases I've mentioned. And really, this is a chance for Canada to reclaim its leadership position in the world on this issue. And it is so emblematic of the meanness and the smallness and what we see coming out of the Harper government that we would be able to watch these people fleeing for their lives, literally swimming across oceans, walking across borders, and say, not our problem. these could be terrorists, so we can't take them. I think that's like everything that is wrong with the Harper government that represents the worst of Canada, and under a Liberal government, that would be something we would change immediately, and I think Canadians are in step with us on this as well.
Yeah, so I just wanted to build on that because I think you do make some really good points. And I'm going to concede that because I do think we need to have more collaboration in our government. My grandparents were some of those Hungarian refugees, actually. So, and I think it's important to recognize that we've always been a world leader in immigration. We've always, we've always accepted people, sometimes begrudgingly, but we've been working on making our policies a lot better. And in line with that, we do need to reform our immigration system because right now it really places a high amount of emphasis on people who are already coming from developed countries, people who are who have, I guess, high-level skills that are typically associated with, frankly, being white. And that's not acceptable. We have to make it an even playing field for everybody who wants to come to Canada. That also means that when refugees come here, and to quickly outline our plan, we have committed to taking on 25,000 government-sponsored refugees as per the UN targets, and an unlimited amount of privately sponsored refugees. But that means that we do have to have healthcare, jobs, as you have said. We need to have services for them. We need to help them integrate without forcing them to assimilate. That's the key thing, is integration versus assimilation. And the last thing that I want to note is that it's really shameful on Stephen Harper's behalf, I guess, that we've fallen so much in how the world looks at us. And I have to say that, like, we've never lost our seat on the Security Council until Stephen Harper's government. It's shameful. And beyond that, we've never been treated with such an amount of disrespect and disdain on the world stage. And part of it is because we're not doing our part to take in these refugees. Somebody had said to me once, you don't get on the boat unless the water is safer than the land. You're not going to put your family through that kind of risk to get to Europe or to Canada or to wherever you're going unless the situation is really that dire for you at home. You are not going to do that otherwise. And that means that we need to have respect for the narratives of these refugees. We need to not be hand-selecting the refugees that we want through the Prime Minister's office, as the Conservative government has been doing. We need to give everybody a fair chance, regardless of their background, where they're coming from, and we need to recognize that some people do have needs greater than others, especially if they're refugees.
The Green Party also, in terms of tangible commitments, has committed to expediting reunification efforts and reversing a lot of the barriers that were put in place by the Conservative government into reunification efforts. Part of the reason why is because not only do publicly provided social services they're critical to ensuring the success of refugees after they arrive here in Canada, but also supports provided to them by their familial units, by their family and friends who are coming here or who already are here. There are a tremendous amount of people here in Canada, Canadian citizens and landed immigrants, who are desperately trying to get their family members and friends out of war-torn countries such as Syria, and are having barrier after barrier preventing their ability to do so. Those are exactly the types of people who need to have their families here now, because they're the ones who are able to provide resources directly to them to ensure that they're going to be successful and looked after. There's absolutely no reason why that group of people in particular should be delayed from being able to seek shelter here in Canada.
The question is, are we a compassionate country? Are we a country that does things not just based on our interests, but on our values? And that's a question that I think is pretty open right now with the Harper government. I mean, they talk a really big line on the principled foreign policy, yet they've had about 1 million positions on China. Either they want money and they ignore human rights, or they ignore money and they want human rights. On the UN, as Natalie said, I totally agree with that. It's absolutely embarrassing. It's embarrassing that people in the world, and this has been in a lot of the foreign press coverage of this election campaign, are saying, where's Canada? Where's Canada's leadership? We used to be a country that, brokered peace deals. Lester Pearson, the Liberal Prime Minister, won the Nobel Peace Prize for solving the Suez crisis and inspiring peacekeeping. So I wonder where the compassion's gone, but I know it rests with the Liberal Party and can be back in government in 5 days.
And
thank you. And we're going to wrap that one up. Much to say, but we're going to wrap that one up. All three parties here today say, if elected, they will hold a national inquiry into murdered and missing Aboriginal women. Beyond that promise, what other actions would you take to change policies that were put in place under the Harper government? Natalie Petra of the New Democratic Party. You have 2 minutes.
The big thing for me, and the first thing that you have to do to turn around any relationship that you have with the First Nations is to first off recognize that they are a sovereign people. They have that right under the Constitution, and we've oppressed them for so long. And we started that oppression first off with cultural genocide, with physically killing them. We have to recognize that, and we cannot keep denying that, which is what the Harper government has been doing. We're denying our own history. And then after that, we switched from these very, very outwardly racist policies, and we internalized them. So now we paternalize the First Nations. We treat them like, okay, well, we need to take care of you. And we don't treat them with the proper respect that they're due. So the first step is to treat them, as I said, with respect on a nation-to-nation basis. We need to recognize their inherent right to self-government. They do have that right constitutionally. It's not a disputable question. It's just the right thing to do, and it's actually legal. It's within our system. So that's what the NDP will be committed to doing. That said, we do have to recognize that we do have a huge part. We are basically the reason that First Nations are as destitute as they are right now. So we do want to commit funding in the billions to ensure that First Nations have access to water, to housing, to education services, to make sure that they are not treated like second-class citizens of our country. But in doing so, we cannot paternalize them. We can't tell them how these programs are going to be run. We have to listen to them. We can't be standing here at these podiums and just speaking at them. We have to have a conversation, and we have to listen to what they're saying to us. So the NDP is committed to that, to an inquiry on the missing and murdered Aboriginal women. Frankly, I'm ashamed that our non-existent Conservative colleague has refused to engage in that. And as I said, we have earmarked billions of dollars towards improving the conditions that First Nations face, but we need to have more specific conversations with them. Lastly, sorry, I just want to finish off my last thought here. We're committed to implementing the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee immediately, as soon as we form government. But what I think is really key and what distinguishes us from the Liberal point of view is that the Liberals have gone out and said on the record that they will commit to implementing all of them. And not all of them are federally regulated targets. Some of them are municipal, some of them are provincial. So we will commit to all of the federal targets, and then we will put pressure on municipalities and provinces to implement the rest. We think that provinces are ready to work with us. They haven't been spoken to by Stephen Harper, frankly. He's been refusing to meet with premiers, so they haven't had a chance. But to us, it's important to implement the findings of the TRC as soon as we get into government.
Okay, can I remind parties to be specific about your initiatives?
Sure.
With what exact policies you'll turn over, and then let's open it up to the floor.
Yeah, specifically, I have 2 macro policies and a few micro policy suggestions that the Green Party is proposing. The first being a negotiation of a comprehensive Indigenous self-governance arrangement. Also a burying of the Indian Act, and I apologize, 3 macro points. And the third being, for the first time, a Green Party government and Green Party MPs will advocate for Indigenous voices and Indigenous leaders at the table of the Council of Canadian Governments, which means that they'll be meeting with premiers and they'll be meeting with the Prime Minister to ensure that the Indigenous voice is heard in macro policy decisions all across the country. At a micro level, I think it's important to tackle conditions on reserves immediately. The first being education. As I've mentioned before, earlier on in the debate, there's a 2% cap for increases to education for Indigenous students. This means every single year, not adjusted for inflation, those students are being more and more underserved by our education system. We would eliminate that cap to ensure that adequate education is being brought to those reserves, in addition to a housing strategy that incorporates our reserve needs. In addition to that, I think that Canada, not just First Nations communities, but people all across Canada are suffering from Canada's approach to the criminalization of substance abuse and prostitution. Those issues disproportionately affect Indigenous communities, and a rehash of how we treat those issues to ensure that they're treated on a harm reduction lens and a public health lens opposed to a criminal lens will also go a long way to helping those communities and ensuring the health outcomes and life outcomes of those people are improved dramatically.
The fact is, there is no amount of money or programs or whatever that can right the historical wrongs that this country and its governments throughout the years, even up to recently, have committed against our Indigenous peoples. But that said, we must try. And the first thing, obviously, I'm 100% agree with Natalie on the nation-to-nation basis for negotiations. And in fact, the Liberal Party doesn't just talk about this, we've actually done it before. In 2005 with the Kelowna Accords, the historic $1 billion agreement for First Nations, canceled by the Harper government right after they got into office, which is quite shameful. And that framework is something we would bring back right away. But in terms of specifics, the fact is that there is an incredible funding gap, as was mentioned, between First Nations pupils and their counterparts in regular society, and we would invest $2.6 billion over 4 years to close that gap. There's also a huge gap in the infrastructure on reserves. The fact is that reserves, often things are in bad shape, and the government has a leadership responsibility on that, and to that end, we would put $500 million over 3 years into improving on-reserve infrastructure such that all sorts of opportunities from social to economic would be improved for First Nations peoples. But there's one other thing I want to add, and this is the most shameful. The fact is that there are an appallingly high number of First Nations reserves, largely in Northern Ontario, Manitoba, and elsewhere, that lack access to safe drinking water. And the most pernicious is the Shoal Lake First Nation in southern Manitoba. And the irony of this First Nation is that they actually are the location of the reservoir for the drinking water for the city of Winnipeg. So for 100 years now, the city of Winnipeg has drawn its water and sucked it in a pipeline and then treated it elsewhere from this First Nation. Yet for 20 years, these people have not had a single glass of potable drinking water coming out of their tap. If I were born there, I would never have drunk water out of the tap in my entire lifetime. That is a third world condition happening in a developed, rich, and affluent country. And I don't know how Stephen Harper can sleep at night knowing that fact, and the Liberal government is absolutely committed to ensuring that no Canadian citizen, and in this case, namely First Nations, lack access to safe drinking water, because that is a human right.
Yeah, I agree with you on that topic as well. And I think I just wanted to actually, I know that I'm not debating you, but I did want to quickly touch on something that you had said, which was that we want specifics. And the fact of the matter is, as I said, you cannot tell First Nations how to implement their own programs. We can't. We have to have a conversation with them. So while we can sit here and say, okay, yes, we need better water, better housing conditions, better education, as you touched on, we need to decriminalize things that specifically target First Nations, like prostitution, like marijuana. Those things, actually, First Nations are hideously overrepresented within our prison system because of those things. So we do need to tackle those things, and there are specific commitments, but it's very difficult to say, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z without actually having that conversation with them first, once we are the government. But the last thing I wanted to quickly mention, the Assembly of First Nations has actually given its endorsement to the NDP because we fulfill all 6 of their platforms, their pillars, which they'd like to see fulfilled, that being strengthening First Nations communities, equitable funding, upholding their rights, respecting the environment, revitalizing their language and culture traditions, and implementing the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations. The Liberal Party actually received an incomplete mark from them, and the Green Party received a partially incomplete mark. We are the only party that passed on all 6 of the platform points that First Nations themselves want to see from our parties. And I think that's really worth noting.
I'd be really interested to know, though, what the APTN has to say about Mulcair's conditional support of projects like Kinder Morgan, which are unequivocally opposed by First Nations communities and disproportionately affect First Nations communities. I think the decarbonization of our economy that is being talked about continuously by the Green Party is a direction that is going to disproportionately benefit the lives of First Nations communities, particularly when they're going to be directly involved at the negotiation table, understanding exactly how their natural resources are going to be extracted and utilized, and that they're going going to be utilized and refined right here in Canada. In addition, I think things like on the Fisheries Act, the things like fisheries projects, specifically on the West Coast, when you're looking at giant salmon farms that exclude the ability for First Nations communities to actually fish in the rivers that they have fished in for hundreds or thousands of years, are absolutely deplorable. They need to be involved in local economies. They need to be involved in the decarbonization of our economy, and that's going to be a shift that is going to benefit oil barons and traditional brokers of power significantly less, and First Nations communities significantly more.
Okay, we'll end it off with Matthew's comments. Marijuana laws are important election issues for many young voters. Alexander Cohen, what is the Liberal Party's plan to decriminalize personal possession of marijuana, and how does your party feel about legalization?
Legalization? Well, it's no secret we're all for it. And the fact is, it is way past the time this should happen. It is common sense. The fact is that the conservative policy on marijuana is so failed. On one hand, it's an incredible waste of money with unequal enforcement throughout the country, such that people like me are likely not going to be targeted, whereas, as Matthew was saying, Indigenous Canadians, but in particular, people of color living in the wrong area, much more subject to government oversight, much more subject to police brutality when it comes to marijuana. Also, mandatory minimums that have been struck down as unconstitutional. 2 years in jail for having up 6 pot plants. That person's not a criminal. The flip side of this is that people are still smoking pot. We still have the highest rate of use of marijuana for young people in the developed world. And the money that they're spending on that marijuana, where does it go? It goes into the hands of gangs. It goes into the hands of organized crime. There's a better way to do it. And actually, the United States is leading us on this. Places like Colorado, Oregon, Washington have legalized it, have a regulated market, and it's going really well. So the Liberal plan is to legalize and regulate marijuana, to have it market controlled by the government, to have strict age regulations. And actually what we think we'll see is money out of the hands of gangs, as Mexican drug cartels are being steadily hit by Colorado's legalization of marijuana. So we want to hit them here too. That would also result in fewer young people smoking marijuana because it would be less accessible. The fact is that it's harder to get alcohol because it's sold at a government-run store rather than just being sold by some guy on the street, as marijuana is now. So there's a lot of fear-mongering coming out of the Conservatives. Just Stephen Harper saying marijuana is indefinitely worse than tobacco. Newsflash, I don't think marijuana's ever killed anybody, whereas tobacco claims the lives of hundreds of thousands of Canadians every year. And I know this is a charged issue, but it really needn't be. It's common sense. I think most people in this room would agree with me. And really, the Liberal Party are the only ones who've been clear on this. We've seen 3 different positions in a little over a year from the NDP. Mulcair saying, first, I am, quote, I think decriminalization would be a mistake. Then saying he likes decriminalization, which would still put money in the hands of gangs and still not be a common sense policy. And now, as his campaign is dying down, he's desperate for the youth vote, he's reconsidering. So I would advise you to stick with the party that's been dead clear and has taken a lot of heat from the Conservatives for it, but has a common sense approach that will keep marijuana out of the hands of young people and not criminalize the wrong people.
Okay, let's open it up. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so you mentioned that we've had 3 different policies, and I don't think that's really fair to say, and that's not really accurate either. So firstly, our plan has been immediate decriminalization, and just last week, Tom Mulcair announced that inevitably does lead to legalization at the end of the day. But our position has always been really clear. One of the first things we'll do when we get into government is decriminalize the use of marijuana, and that means that, immediately speaking, we'll be targeting far fewer minorities and First Nations who are disproportionately represented within our prison system as a result of the criminalization of marijuana. Stephen Harper's Conservatives have only promised to crack down on it more. And the 3 of us, at least up here, are agreeing that we do need to move towards legalization. We just see different ways of getting there. So to us, to the NDP, our position's been really, really solid. As I said, we want to start with decriminalization, and then we need to have some sort of national study. We need to bring together communities. We need to bring together law enforcement. We need to bring together those who grow marijuana for medicinal purposes. We need to bring together all aspects of this community, and we need to have a national conversation about this. Inevitably, we do think that will lead to a legalization policy, but you can't just snap your fingers and implement something without fully consulting all the people that you're going to affect with making that decision. And as you said, you are right in that this does produce immense amounts of tax dollars. Oregon and Colorado, Washington, they've been like making mad bank on this stuff. Like, honestly, they've been building schools, hospitals,
so
roads.
much money they have to give it
There's
back to
so
the
much money
taxpayers.
to be had. And you're right, you are keeping it out of the hands of organized crime. So the legalization is the end goal for us, but we do need to do it in a stepped, tiered process that is responsible and that takes into account that not everybody does have the same opinion on marijuana as all of us might up here.
The Green Party is the only party that's running in this election that is advocating for a drug policy that doesn't treat substance abuse as a criminal offense, but a public health issue. This means that we're not just talking about marijuana, right? Because that's the tip of the iceberg. There are a host of substance abuse issues where criminalization and a lack of legalization and ambiguity about what the law means on each drug prevents people from seeking help who need it most, prevents people who have dependents from accessing help, which also hurts them, prevents them from being able to access any level of support to actually provide health outcomes that are going to be beneficial for their future. This means that we're the only party that has the guts to say that all drugs need to be regulated and legislated. All drugs need to be subjected to a responsible drug policy that treats them as the public health issues that they are. Because ignoring the fact that substance abuse is a thing, no matter what that substance is irresponsible policy. And that's policy that's being stood for by the Liberals and the New Democrats in this election because they're too afraid of people who don't understand substance abuse, that they're not willing to stand up for the thousands of Canadians that are currently being punished under an ambiguous legal framework.
So I think that's really, that's kind of disturbing that you would say that, because the fact of the matter is there are some drugs that are genuinely dangerous and that should not be just sold, even if you're of age. I can't picture a Canada where we'd ever be selling heroin or cocaine, things like that. You know, I don't think that the average Canadian would be comfortable with that. The fact of the matter is there are definitely drugs that are a lot more dangerous than marijuana is. That said, I do agree that we do need to have a little bit more understanding for those who do suffer from addiction. Addiction is it's a disease at the end of the day, and that means that you need medical help. You need safe places, like we see in Vancouver right now, so that if you are a user, that at least you're not in an unclean environment and you're not increasing your own risk. But the fact of the matter is we can't move to, we do need to also address disproportionate prison sentences for those who are racialized, but we can't move towards a system where every drug is legalized, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of drugs that are really dangerous and that should not be out there to the public.
On that, not all drugs are going to be sold at Max Milk, just based on the fact that they're going to be legalized, right? Safe injection sites, treatment offices are an incredibly important approach that we should be taking to all substances. And that means that they need to be legalized, because that means that those people are not going to approach dodgy drug dealers on the corner obtaining contaminated drugs that are going to create a larger health issue for them and for our public health system.
It's a laudable goal, some of what we're hearing from the Green Party, but it's also a bit rich, and it's also the fact that a party without a realistic chance of forming government can say different things. The fact is that the most common sense approach, and really the most realistic approach, is to legalize it and to do it with minimum time. I would disagree with Natalie and the NDP. And really the facts of other cases in Uruguay and in multiple places in the United States show there doesn't need to be further study. Okay, we have the highest rate of pot use among teens in the developed world. They don't need to study it more. They're already pretty familiar with it, clearly. And having a decriminalization, all that does, it puts more money into the hands of gangs. You still spend government money enforcing it. You still waste government resources, and you miss out on all the potential profits, as Natalie was saying, that these states in America are getting from the legalization of weed. So much so in Colorado that they have to give money back to the taxpayers. Legalize weed, common sense policies, and money back to the taxpayers sounds good to me.
I just want to quickly say, though, it's a study to implement, not a study about marijuana itself. We know what the effects of marijuana are. It's just a study on how to implement it in a safe way and a stable way, and we need to have a conversation with communities and with law enforcement to make that happen.
I'm going to jump in right there. Our time is up. In 2011, only 39% of young people voted in Canada. That is 1.8 million votes that weren't cast. It's upsetting that so many young people are disengaged from the democratic process. Matthew Castleman of the Green Party, what will your party do to encourage Canadians to stand up and be counted, and not just at election time, but participate in the political discourse of this country?
I think a policy solution to ensuring that people are more likely to vote is a reduction in the voting age from 18 to 16 to ensure that the time that they're going to be voting is going to occur at home. To make sure that they get in the habit of voting before a time that they're on their own. I think that that outcome is also going to ensure that the people who are interested. I, for example, have been a member of the Green Party of Canada since I was 11 years old, and I've been involved in the Canadian democratic process for a time that is pretty crazy to think that I wasn't able to vote for all of those years. Many Canadians at that age are very involved, and I think you'll see more of that if the voting age is reduced. I think proportional representation, not alternative vote as being suggested by the Liberals, is going to also ensure that proportionally you're going to have voices, young voices and other voices reflected more accurately in the House. I think democratic reform is also another thing that is going to decrease the level of disenfranchisement that youth feel with traditional parties. Whipped votes means that members of parliament don't have the opportunity to represent your needs, and they don't have the opportunity to deviate from party line even if they are unequivocally opposed to the position that is being taken by the party. I think the reason why young people are disenfranchised by traditional parties is because they don't feel that members of parliament have the opportunity to represent them or speak for them. In fact, they're just puppets that are advocating for whatever they're being told to advocate for. I think an increase in evidence-based policy is also going to increase the level of respect that they have for democratic institutions. $75 million annually for science and research is being proposed by the Green Party, and also a disengagement from talks about strategic voting, because strategic voting to young voters is telling them that your vote and your policy opinions don't matter. You should vote for me not because you are inspired by my message, but because I'm the person that's going to defeat the person that you hate more than me. I don't feel that that's an inspiring message. I feel that that is going to be the one that is going to drive people away from the polls, and that's exactly what we see in elections past when strategic voting was even more of a factor.
Okay,
So I wanted to respond really, really fast to that. First off, I do want to note that the Canadian Federation of Students has actually released the numbers, and they've said that more students and more young people are actually voting in this election than has ever happened, especially in comparison to 2008 and 2011. So we see that young people are being engaged by this conversation, but we do need to do more. The NDP have a huge commitment to youth. We're the only party with youth MPs right now, the McGill Four. We have 13 youth candidates across the country. That's more than any other party has proposed, and I'm so proud of that. The NDP has also involved us in the making of their youth platform at every step of the way. So I'm elected from a convention of the New Democratic Party, and I represent youth to the party. So when we sat down to make the platform, we had those conversations with the party, and we were involved. They listened to us rather than saying to us, okay, this is how it has to be. That said, we also do need democratic reform. We're committed to a mixed member proportional system, so a proportional representation system, and we also want to repeal the Unfair Elections Act. The Unfair Elections Act targets young people in ways that I just can't even begin to describe because they're just so hideous. The Unfair Elections Act makes it harder for young people to vote because Stephen Harper, frankly, doesn't want you to vote. So at the end of the day, I think that it's important that we repeal that act, that we institute a proportional representation system, and that no matter what party you're interested in, you go out there and you vote. And whether that's for Alex's party or your party or my party or even whatever independent you'd like, the Rhinoceros Party, if that's what you're interested in, go and do it. Go out and vote. It takes 10 minutes of your day, but you're participating in a system that, frankly, so many of our forefathers and our foremothers have died to create for us. It's important that you get out there and that you commit to, even if it's to spoil your ballot, that you have your voice heard.
So obviously, I'd like to echo what we've already heard from both people up here. There is no understating the importance of democracy, and there's no understating the importance of really the fight that has been going on for years now around the world for democratic rights, for democratic government, and it is an incredible luxury here that we can afford not to care about politics, we can afford not to care about elections, because that shows just how lucky we are. But when it comes to young people in politics, I find it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Young people don't see their needs reflected in the party platforms. They don't see politicians speaking to them. They don't see politicians engaging them on their level, which they do to a lot of other groups. And they see a political world that is increasingly dominated by division, by fear, by meanness, by attack ads. And as a young person getting involved in politics, that's not that appealing. Getting involved in the political realm where everyone's nasty all the time, where it's a bunch of rich white guys squabbling together, and consequentially that's the chicken. The egg being that because young people don't choose to participate, then politicians can afford to ignore them, because if they're not voting, why do you need to craft a platform to appeal to their votes? And so it's a vicious cycle, and the Liberal Party is committed to breaking this vicious cycle. And you asked what we would do between elections to keep young people engaged, and we have an answer, and that's create something called the Prime Minister's Youth Advisory Council, which would be a permanent body of young people between the ages of, I believe, 16 and 24, which would be a voice for young people at the heart of government. And Natalie talked about how the young NDP gets asked about the platform. Well, how about the young people of Canada getting asked about the government? That sounds pretty appealing to me, and this is a way for youth voices to be permanently engaged in government. As well, we're fully committed in our plan for real change to re-examining the voting system. Unlike the other parties, we're not sure which one's best yet. We want to consider that. That probably needs a bit more study than the decriminalization of marijuana, I would say. And one of the things we are considering is lowering the voting age, though in other countries that hasn't proven to be such a silver bullet, and I would caution against that as your big thing to young people engaged, because then you're probably, in some countries, it has been just the creation of 2 more years of apathetic people. So the reality is the best way to do it is to engage young people on their terms, and I'm very proud that the Liberal platform in this election is all about making it easier to get a job, easier to find a place to live, easier to pay for school. Those are 3 issues that I think appeal to the lives of every person in this room, and those are issues you can go out and vote for on Monday. Vote for us.
So that's the thing, though, is that you say you're going to create a youth cabinet. Okay, sounds like a really great idea. But how has the Liberal Party been doing on consulting young people outside of Parliament? Well, we see that every single job in the Premier's office or within ministers, cabinet ministers' offices, even right here in Ontario, is actually you have to be a Liberal to get the job. You have to be a Liberal and you have to be in their clique to get involved, and that's not okay. We need to listen to voices of all stripes from you.
I don't agree with the NDP or the Liberal commitments, though, that talk about basically consulting youth wings within their party are actually speaking to the broader concern of widespread youth disengagement. The types of affluent or often affluent people that are involved in party politics today
are not
going to be the people that are often that need to be targeted the most, right? People who don't vote are not attending NDP and Liberal conventions. People who don't vote are not going to be attending the youth wing talk with the Premier about how their opinions are going to be shaping public policy decisions. The types of things that are going to engage people in the parliamentary process are the types of concerns and issues that we're talking about, which is respect for democracy, ensuring that your member of parliament has the capacity to represent your needs because they're not going to be whipped by a party whip or a party leader. Those types of issues matter to young people. Those types of issues are not going to be taken care of so long as bills are going to be unequivocally passed by governments, regardless of the member of parliament's feelings.
Our time is up for this question. Our time is up for this question. There is a lot to say, but we're going to conclude it there. And that ends this portion of our debate. Thank you very much to all 3 of you. And we're going to move on to the closing statements. Again, in the order of the draw. So 2 minutes each. First up, we have Alexander Cohen of the Liberal Party.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank the Humber Journalism Program for organizing this debate. It's certainly fun to be here and a little intimidating to be up on a big screen. So hi, Mom. Hopefully I'm doing okay. This election has been the longest in modern Canadian history. It's been 10 weeks, about to become 11, and I think we're all a little ground down at this point. I'm only surviving it with the help of antibiotics and cold medicine. But we've heard a lot from the parties about what's going to actually affect the lives of young people and how a government's going to make a positive difference in your life. And I'm proud to say that I genuinely believe that the Liberal Party is going to have the biggest difference in a young person's life. The fact we are committed to taking concrete actions, 120,000 youth jobs, enlarging the grants to make it easier to pay for school, having a national housing strategy that makes it easier to have affordable housing and incentivizes the building of affordable housing. But it's beyond just these stereotypical youth issues. Unlike any of the other parties, we are going to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% and then cut them on 90% of people. Almost all of young people fall into that category, so that the government is giving the assistance to those those who need it most. Unlike the other two major parties, we're going to legalize marijuana because we don't think we need to wait any longer. We don't think we need to study it further. I think it's time that we stop wasting government money enforcing stupid policies and stop criminalizing people that don't deserve to be in jail. But more so, we have a plan that I think is a much more positive, much more optimistic vision of the country. Yes, we're honest, we're going to run modest deficits, but we need to build the country. This is Canada, and as Justin Trudeau says, in Canada, better is always possible. And I think that the Liberal Party has offered by far the most drastic plan, but also the most progressive and really the most beneficial plan for the largest number of Canadians, in particular young people, and this vision of the country that's progressive, that's hopeful, a Canada of the future, a Canada that's better. And on October 19th, you can vote for better, and hopefully we'll get it.
Okay, thank you. In perfect time. And now we're going to move on to Matthew Castleman of the Green Party. You have 2 minutes as well.
I hope, if anything, I've given you something to think about on Election Day. I hope you have a better understanding of some of the policy positions that the Green Party has taken in this election, this very critical election. And I hope I have the opportunity to chat with some of you after the forum today to clarify any of the positions that I've taken here today and that are represented in the Green Party platform online. Above and beyond the policy positions that are being taken by all parties on stage today, all three progressive parties that are here, often advocating for similar policy suggestions. I hope you think very critically about your vote on October 19th. I hope you look at the history of the work that is being done by Elizabeth May and her capacity to not only advocate for change and be a strong representative for you, but also a strong constituency MP who's advocating directly for the concerns of the people that she's representing. Politics in Canada is broken, and that's exactly because we have trusted mainstream parties time and time again and punished them only every so often between one another. I think it's time for a strong alternative that has the ability to hold progressive parties to account for the policy positions that they're taking, so that they don't forget about them on October 20th when they're in power and they have the opportunity to just lead the country without an ability for constituents to have any say about how their member of parliament is going to represent them. I implore you to consider voting Green on Election Day. I implore you to do this because I think it's time for young people to have a strong advocate in the House. And I think it's time that we begin to repair our democracy after the Harper decade. And I hope on October 19th, you vote for the Green Party, regardless of the riding that you're in. I look forward to conversations with you after. And thank you for participating in a democratic process.
Thank you. And now, Natalie Petra of the New Democratic Party, you have the floor.
Yeah, so first off, thank you to Humber College for hosting this forum, and thank you to all of you guys for coming out. It's really, really great to see you guys so engaged and interested in the issues that matter to us. The NDP has a really strong progressive vision. It's fueled by the hope and optimism that we saw from Jack Layton in 2011 and that we've seen Tom Mulcair carry through Parliament up until today. We've seen Tom Mulcair be a progressive leader who holds Stephen Harper's feet to the fire. We have a solid plan for jobs, for tuition reduction, for the environment, for $15 a day childcare, for when you go out there and you do try to start your family, for affordable housing, for First Nations. Our plan is comprehensive and it's progressive. We're the only party that really truly represents that diversity. And I just wanted to quickly note, we have equity caucuses for those who face disabilities, for those who are racialized, for those who are young, LGBT. We have diverse voices in our party, and we let those diverse voices fuel our policies. we have choices in this election. For the first time in our history as a country, we have 3 viable choices who are ready to form government. We have the Conservatives, and well, the fact that they're not here should speak volumes to all of you. They don't really care about you young people here, or any of us at all, to be honest. We have the Liberal Party, who promise left and who talk a good game, but when it comes down to them being in government, they've always governed right. We've seen climate change emissions go up under their governments. We've seen them institute a whole bunch of really, frankly, right-wing policies. We've seen them scrap plans for federal minimum wage. They promise a lot of things, but they don't deliver at the end of the day. At the end of the day, I hope that you go out there and vote. And I implore you to consider the NDP. I really hope that you do vote for our party. Natalie Rizzo is our candidate in King Vaughan. She's young, she's phenomenal. But even if it's not for my party, I hope that you do go out there and you vote, because that's the most important part out of any of this.
Thank you. And so, thank you to all the participants for taking the time to come here and participate in this important debate. And thanks to everyone in our audience and those who watch via live stream at humbernews.ca, as well as our radio listeners at 96.9 Radio Humber. We wanted this debate to help young voters actively engage in democracy. We hope this debate has done just that. Election Day is this Monday. Go out and make your voice count. Thank you for all being here. I'm Catherine Green.
Well done. I'm trying to come on a leash here, you know?
Okay, that's it.